Lantern Analytica, and it is on Cold War 2.0, the Chinese threat to the world order, and India's new role in it. We'll be beginning this session now. And before beginning this session, I like to introduce our organization, Red Lantern Analytica, along with the guest speaker of this session. So, Red Lantern Analytica is an international affairs observers group based out of New Delhi, and we research upon critical issues related to China, and we have a special focus on Sino-India relations. As we know that China is constantly in a rise for a last couple of decades, and it's imperative to follow it because Chinese threat is pretty much eminent to the global world order. And as a guest speaker for this today's session, we have Dr. Manan Dwivedi sir, who is Assistant Professor in Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi, and he is a scholar of repute, having works in international relations, American foreign policy, India's nuclear policy, and governance issues. He has authored 7 books, and he has also several contributions in the form of seminal and pioneering research papers to various journals of repute. I welcome you, sir, to this session and will now hand over the dice to you for your special address. Over to you, sir.
I have been once again dealing actually. I have been once again dealing that I cannot see my picture.
Sir, we can hear you, sir. Your picture is also visible to us, sir.
But I cannot see the screen actually.
Okay, sir. If you can just disconnect and connect again, sir, because we can see your picture and audio quite clearly, sir. There must be a connection
Okay,
issue at your
disconnect
end,
and
sir.
once again connect. All right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Is the screen visible to now, sir?
But it is not visible.
Okay, sir. If you can just disconnect, sir, disconnect and connect again.
I'm doing that actually.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. But there is a sort of an echo, sir.
There happens to be this echo.
Yes, sir. There are 2 devices might be at your end, sir. If you can just mute one.
Now it is all right.
Yes, sir. It is perfectly all right, sir.
Can you listen to me?
Yes, sir. We can listen to you quite clearly, sir. Your
All right.
audio and video is quite clear at our end, sir.
All right. So I would like to begin and I would extend my heartfelt thankfulness to Red Lantern Analytica for inviting me to share my thoughts and bring to light certain facts which are very much pertinent about the Sino-India relation. But when we talk about the Sino-India relations, then one of the core ideas, one of the core dictums that we should always stick to, though it has been often repeated, and though it has been part and parcel of the general narrative about the People's Republic of China in the larger international system. Still, it needs to be reiterated right now. That kind of a reiteration happens to be about the core theme of the cynic foreign policy, that is Chinese foreign policy. Mao, Mao Zedong used to say, and Deng Xiaoping, people like Hu Jintao, people like Xi Jinping now, and people before him like Wen Jiabo, they all have gone on to contend very clearly, very pithily and very tersely, that China needs to hide itself, and China needs to bide its time, and China needs to be secretive, clandestine, and all its development and preparation for a grand strategy needs to be what you call shrouded in secrecy, shrouded in the rug, so that the rest of the world, the rest of the competitor countries like India, Japan, South Korea, and the world's only surviving superpower, United States of America, they do not realize that China is dreaming big and China intends to overwhelm the rest of the international system. What we need to contend here, what I need to convey here and contend here is the idea that we can talk about the peaceful rise of China. We can talk about the peaceful rise of China, and it is this shrouding in secrecy and in a kind of a clandestine manner that People's Republic of China, through its premier in 2003, and 4, Hu Jintao, he brought out the policy of Zhengao Haping's UK. Zhengao Haping's UK, which meant peaceful rise in the international system. Now, what we need to contend here is that China was very amply targeted, and China was, and the world called, and the Committee of Nations did not deter to call the entirety of the Chinese example as a kind of a calling a spade a spade. What I mean to convey here is this particular idiom that the Chinese rise was, in inverted commas, called as peaceful rise. But the American scholars, the American IR observers, like Professor Wang, who has written the book Harmony and War, and the IR's superhero specialist, super IR theory specialist, John Mersheimer. John Mersheimer came in, and John Mersheimer talked about this particular idea in his book, that is the tragedy of great power politics, which came out in 2003. They went on to contend that China's rise is not peaceful by any condition. China is going to rise. China is aiming to become the global superpower of the larger community of nations, replacing United States of America, and that happens to be the core element of the Chinese dream. This is how the Western scholars and this is how the American observers, this is what they deciphered out of the Chinese foreign policy, that is peaceful rise. So very quickly, after in the post 2004 period, there was a change in nomenclature in the Chinese propaganda apparatus, and specifically in newspapers such as Global Times, wherein we can go on to very easily and conveniently contend that the term or the nomenclature peaceful rise was changed. It was replaced by peaceful development. It was replaced by peaceful development, so that the China threat story, or considering China as a threat to world peace, considering Chinese rise as a menace to the stability, solidity, prosperity, and wealth of the larger international system, that this kind of a hitch or this kind of a negativity so that it could be relegated to the back burner. So, what we need to understand and what we need to comprehend over here is that we are most of the scholars, the Indian scholars too, along with the European scholars and the American IR theory mandarins, they all believed in the idea of the China threat. That is, they realized that China might be talking about its Confucian centers and the way the China's Confucian centers have spread their tentacles, have spread their influence and pelf and their outreach in the rest of the world of around more than 500 centers are there right now belonging to the People's Republic of China. That kind of an outreach through soft power that has been the purported or propagandized or an outward winner of the Chinese foreign policy. So the Americans realized that this was just a show off. Indians to realized, Prime Minister Narendra Modi to realized that this was just a facade. That is, soft power was something which was very well implemented and executed by United States of America and its foreign policy mandarins, and to a great extent by our honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi. But China was using it as a facade. China is using it as a show off. China is using it as a hide skin, as a hide, as a skin hide, wherein the real military intention, the real hegemonic, the real expansionist intention of People's Republic of China that still remains the core element of the China's rise. Whether it is peaceful or whether it is developmental or whether it is completely dependent upon soft power, that remains a theme which can be discussed upon and which can be deliberated upon later on. If we go back into the Cold War, how can we say it's a Cold War Part 2 or Cold War Part 2X or Cold War 2.0? If you look into the current situation, what we are going to find is that just look at two instances which have taken up uh, the core, which has taken up the core interest and the core limelight in in the larger international system. The first one happens to be what I am going to relate to you. The first one happens to be the statement which has been released by the Ministry of External Affairs in India by Sri Arindam Bagchi. He has gone on to contend that it was under the information news by, or it was under the espionage, or the information bite of the Ministry of External Affairs that one bridge had been built in the Pangong So area, which was the fulcrum of conflict between New Delhi and Beijing uh, on, only recently till February 2021. What I need to convey and contend here is that a bridge has been built, and this was very much under the monitoring of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and this development was also monitored, observed, and very keenly followed by the Indian defense establishment and the Indian diplomatic establishment. The news which has come now, that is what Arindam Bagchi went on to contend, is that there is a second bridge which is being built, which is 20 kilometers east of the Pangong So area, and this happens to be a key bridge which is around 120 kilometers in length, and which is and it is 8 meters in breadth. What that means is that a mechanized infantry, armored vehicle, and a pose of armored vehicles can, or a tank group or a pack of tanks can pass through it very easily and conveniently just in time when the Chinese army needs its help to invade India or to go into a kind of an aggressive maneuver at the border, whether it might amount to mere saber rattling, brandishing a sword, or some kind of a part projection movement which has to be unleashed by the Chinese. So, what I'm trying to convey here is that the over aggressive intent of People's Republic of China has always been breathing down the neck, has been breathing down the shoulders of the Indian Union, the New Delhi, and it has always been a pain in the back. In the context of the bridges, if you look into it, what we are going to find is that American satellite imagery and the Indian satellite imagery has also gone on, has picturized it, and we have gone on to realize, as Arindam Bagchi contended, that the second bridge is the real bridge. The second bridge is the real bridge, and the first bridge was just made or constructed or hewn so that it can act as a kind of a support system to the second bridge. To the second bridge, which happens to be that which happens to be the second bridge. So the idea that we can look into here is that the Chinese have been really very wary of the fact that the 45% of the lake area of Pangong So is still dominated, commandeered, and domineered by India, by Indian forces. But if you look into the geostrategic location or how the Pangong So lake is located, what we are going to find is that it is boomerang shape. It is boomerang shape, and apart from being boomerang shape, it has a overarch like this, like a toy, like a disc, like an American boomerang. When once you throw a boomerang, it comes back at you. So that kind of an idea China is still not considering, and that is what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has repeatedly conveyed to his Chinese counterpart and to the Chinese PLA establishment and the PLAF establishment. So around 135 kilometer of an overarch or of a boomerang happens to be the theme about the Pangong show. So what I want to convey through the narration of this incident is that Chinese foreign policy is very expensive, is very expansive, it is hegemonic, it is aggressive, and it falls under the international relations rubric of hegemony, dominance, or something we can call as the super cop behavior. Because People's Republic of China, as part of their Chinese dream, they have a lot of historicity. They have a lot of historicity attached to the entire idea of China and the rest of the world. If we look into the history of People's Republic of China, we can go on to contend. We can go on to contend that Chinese foreign policy mandarins, all the way from Sun Yat-sen in 1927 to Mao Zedong after the humbling of the Kuomintang forces, the nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek, they all believed in this idea of humiliation of a half a century. Now, what do we understand by the meaning of this humiliation of half a century? When we talk about the humiliation of half a century, then we can very safely, very sturdily, and very humanly we can realize and we can posit very clearly that it was in the 1850s and 60s that the Ming dynasty in China was superseded by the Western influence, by the Americans, by the Dutch, by the French, by the Spanish naval conquerors. And if we look at the monographs or the picture tablets of those times, what we are going to find is very unidimensional picturizations on those tablets. These picturizations on those tablets go on to content, go on to inform us, go on to portray go on to depict that there happens to be a kind of a melee with the four walls on the fort near a sea channel belonging to the Chinese Ming dynasty, bombarding the British, Italian, or the Dutch ships. So that kind of a bombardment goes on. But because of the superior naval might and the superior science and technology embedded in the Western establishment, their naval establishments, the Western colonial powers, the Western imperialist powers, they were able to project their power and pelf, and they forced China to growing a particular kind of crop. They forced China into growing a particular kind of crop at that particular point of time, opium. And most of the younger generation of the Chinese race, the cynic race, the HAN, the hand race, it was uh, it was brought into the habit of taking opium. Now, when you want to destroy a country, when you want to destroy a nation, when you want to destroy a civilization like India or China, then what is to be done very easily is to radicalize its younger people, to radicalize the youth, and if they cannot be radicalized uh, through a particular monica, then they can be made physically weak. They can be made mentally subservient to the colonial and the imperial power, wherein they can be made to take opium and they become weak. So the human potential, the human resource potential of China was weakened to a certain extent by the naval incursions of countries like Great Britain and United States of America. So the entire foreign policy of People's Republic of China is basically premised upon an idea of vendetta, upon an idea of vendetta, upon an idea of revenge, upon an idea of making it even Stevens, making it even Stevens with countries in Europe and with United States of America. So the American leaders, whether it be Xi Jinping in the current context, or whether it be Mao, the Maoist overarch, which even troubled India at one point of time and still has made inroads into the rural hinterland of India. So these people, they believed in the fact that the Chinese country or the Chinese civilization was weakened and it was debilitated and its internal strength was shattered and broken apart into pieces by a well-planned pogrom, by the Western countries, which was unleashed by the Western countries. So that kind of a vendetta is something which acts as a kind of a foundation element of Chinese foreign policy, from which they launch forth their attack on the Western countries. Now, I personally feel that in the same manner as Hitler in the pre-Cold War days or in the World War II days, Hitler also committed a mistake by opening the front towards Russia. Hitler's army, the Third Reich, it was doing pretty well and it was on song as far as the escapades of Tobruk and Dunkirk were concerned. The Hitler's army had succeeded in going all the way till the shores of Great Britain and had captured land terrain till France. But there were many generals who also advised Adolf Hitler that do not open up a second front against Russia because Ribbentrop and Goebbels had already entered into a kind of a treaty with Russia. That is, there was a military pact which was going on, which was continuing between Germany and Russia. But Hitler, who was swayed by his madcap race for power, for his thirst for pelf and influence and world domination, we can very aptly call it world domination. because of such megalomaniac and dictatorially fanciful ideas. Hitler attacked Russia. They went all the way to Moscow and Leningrad, but the tensile strength and the innate strength of Stalin's army and willpower proved to be too much of an ask for Germany and for Adolf Hitler's forces. And so, in a way, before the Third Reich catapulted and General Keitel signed the surrender doc in 19, in 1945, the Hitler's army and the Third Reich was sandwiched from the West by the British, the Americans, and the French and the Italians, and from the East by the Ruski forces. And so, in a way, they invited a trouble which led to the final surrender of the Third Reich. Third Reich. This is one part of history. This is one part of history, and I personally feel as a observer of Chinese affairs that the Chinese are also committing the same mistake. Whether it be Tibet, whether it be Taiwan, or whether it be the South China Sea and the troubles which are going ahead in East China Sea, it comes to the fore that China is really overarching itself, and India has to respond. What is India's new role? That is something we can go on into. India has also very aptly established a base in Sri Lanka, basically an air force base in Sri Lanka, where in Ijals, if I get the pronunciation right, in Sri Lanka, where India's Orion anti-submarine planes, around 5 or 6 of them have been stationed. Some of us might conjecture that it is more symbolic in nature and it doesn't have much to do as far as real military girth potential and kill potential of the Indian Air Force is concerned. But still, what we have to keep in mind is an arcane and much talked about and much written about and much commented Pearl of Strings theory, wherein China intends to contain India. The Chinese administration, the Chinese strategy happens to be something for which we don't need to be very intelligent, or we don't need to be a ace espionage agent to find out or to know about it. China intends to surround India through military bases. It has done so through Djibouti in Africa. It is doing it through the China Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has its base in Gwadar port in Pakistan, and India too has to respond. China also has a naval base in Myanmar, that is Coco Islands, and its submarines are stationed in the Coco Islands in Myanmar. So, there happens to be an encircling of India. And I would say, as a response, the liberal democracies too responded. It was in the year 2016 that, keeping in view the new Cold War, that is primarily being fought as a kind of a trade war between United States of America and People's Republic of China. So, keeping aside the trade war, if we concentrate upon the response of countries like India, which is at the maximum receiving end, countries like Japan, countries such as South Korea, nations such as Australia and New Zealand to a minimalistic extent, and finally, a country or a nation no less than United States of America, they came together and formed a group of 4 countries. That is the Quad grouping. They formed the Quad grouping, and America has reiterated umpteen of times in its foreign policy statements and dispatches since the times of former President Donald Trump all the way down to uh, Anthony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State as far as United States of America is concerned, and even Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What have they said? They have categorically stated, without reiterating on the core aim of Quad, that is, the containment and the belittling of People's Republic of China. But they too need to involve. Quad has been established in a practical sense of the term to contain People's Republic of China and to surround it and to get the better of the trade, geoeconomic and geostrategic transactions and quid pro quos that go on in the Asia Pacific region. I was talking about American foreign policy. I was referring to the American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris. They all have gone on to contend that the fulcrum of global politics was Middle East or West Asia earlier on. But as we know, Afghanistan has seen the American retreat and the Afghani blunder or the American withdrawal has been more often and many times now being compared to the American defeat in Vietnam in 1970s through the finally culminating in the Treaty of Paris in 1973. So, America has not been able to follow the high power foreign policy or the high wire rhetoric and verbosity, which translates into actual and brute American force, which was initially festooned by the former President Donald Trump. But the American or the Joe Biden administration has been very rightly positioned by saying that the fulcrum of world politics is now no longer West Asia. It happens to be Asia Pacific, or it happens to be the Quad group of countries. The battle might be fought if we go back by 3 months before Ukraine happened. We can say that the Americans, the Indians, the Australians, and the Japanese, they all were saying that China needs to be contained. But if we look at the Quad grouping, which has been revived by the unstinting and unrelenting efforts and strivings of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then we are going to find out that India, that nowhere have these people or political leaders, they have nowhere gone on to say or come out with a kind of a vision statement that Quad exists because of the China threat theory. That is not palpably being said. That is something which is not being overtly contended and argued. What we are arguing is that all the liberal democracies in Asia Pacific need to gather together under some kind of an umbrella organization to contain the Chinese threat. But Chinese threat is not mentioned in any. If you skim through their documents and vision statements, it is not overtly said. But through the instruments or through the agencies of looking into innovation technologies, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and other issues such as pandemic management in the last couple of years, and exchange of technologies, the theme of dual use technologies being exchanged between India and United States of America much more openly, much more broadly, and in a kind of an unhesitant manner. So, a kind of a kitty of exchanges or exchangeable items and technologies. They form a firm base. They form a firm triangle. They form a firm base or they form a firm triangle as far as the larger logic or the larger rationale behind Quad is concerned. But who would have thought about Ukraine and Russia? If you look into the current context, what we are going to find is that Russia too has a good relationship with China. And that is where the problem center for India and United States of America lies. Now, nobody would have believed that the joining in of Zelensky, President Zelensky from Ukraine, He wants to join the NATO group of countries. But what have the Americans done? I am an American studies scholar, a student of American affairs, and just like we were hoping against all hope and insinuating media bites as they were engulfing us in our drawing rooms, that America will not withdraw from Afghanistan. They did and left behind Taliban as the de jure and the practicable rulers of Kabul and Afghanistan. So China has been very smart. China has good relations with Taliban too. And the Talibani delegation visited China at that point of time when Taliban took over the initial reins of power. And the Chinese were quick enough to get a guarantee, a security guarantee from Afghanistan that they will not engage in Xinjiang or in the issue of dissent expressed by the Uyghur Turks. That is how it happened. Now, coming back to Ukraine, Chinese are very canny. They have a years going back transaction of energy. Energy diplomacy happens to be one of the backbones, a part of the backbone of Sino-Russian relations. And so, around a couple of years back, on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO), it was there that a $2 billion energy pipeline agreement was signed between Russia and China. And China, unlike the European countries, is supporting Russia, thus bringing the entire international system through the bravado of Xi Jinping and through the aggression of Braveheart Vladimir Putin, Uncle Vlad, to the forefront. Now, the Americans with the NATO group of countries are pitted against the Russians and the Chinese. Not directly. We cannot see a coalition of the willing. We are not able to witness a military pact between Russia and China. But if we go back to the old conflictual IR theories, especially the clash of civilizations by Samuel P. Huntington, then he had talked about it in the clash of civilization years back in the 19 early in the early 1990s and much before that in an article in a paper in the coveted journal Foreign Affairs that there is going to be a future clash with the crescent shaped countries of the order of China. A crescent, once again the boomerang comes back into international politics, a kind of a crescent when People's Republic of China, Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and other countries like Iran, they are going to form one part of the coalition of the willing, or they are, to use a term, borrowing a term from President George Bush Jr., they will form the axis of evil using the 2003 terminology of the 2003 Iraq war. So what I want to convey here is that pitted against this axis of evil will be countries like India, United States of America, and other liberal democracies of the world. And as the gelling factor, theoretically we can presuppose that democracies do not go to war with each other. That is a IR theory presupposition, which I am bringing to play in this particular narrative, which I am presenting before my student friends, my young friends. So he had forecasted. Samuel P. Huntington had forecasted, just like Nostradamus 500 years back, that the entire world is going to be a battlefield of countries who are crescent shaped in nature, intent, and policy, and other group of liberal democratic countries who follow the Greek and the Greek ideal of the demos. So this kind of a gladiatorial contest of global ramifications is become will become the key characteristic or the key defining moment of the entire system of states. That is what we should avoid. But and people had been talking about Cold War 2.0, but there was a lot of palaver, lot of talk, and lot of sound bites which had been aired and shared, wherein people talked about World War III. People talk. This is what we are talking about. We are talking about Cold War Part 2, so 2.0. Now coming back to Zelensky, why did he really put the entire Ukrainian nation and thriving and historical and artistically hewn cities like Mariupol, Kiev, and Kharkiv? Why did he open them up to Russian attacks? Was it really important, so important and so significant a foreign policy maneuver that in any condition Kiev had to become a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO? Because Uncle Vlad, Premier Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly talked about reigniting the vestiges or the lost vestiges of the Russian Empire or Tsarist Soviet Union. And countries like Sweden, countries like Sweden and Poland, they have also started their procedures. They have started their paperwork in consultation with the NATO head Stoltenberg, and NATO has welcomed them through Stoltenberg that Sweden and Finland in a few months are naturally going to become the true blue members of NATO and the European Security Agreement, which will pit them directly against Russia, because it is a foregone conclusion. I too personally feel, as an IR student, as a student of foreign policy, and as a student of international relations, that Soviet Union or Vladimir Putin will not be containing himself, containing the Russian war machine by attacking Donbass, Luhansk, the eastern rebellious areas, or Kiev or Mariupol, or the symbolic resistance of the Ukrainian army at the Azovstal military base. At the Azovstal military base steel plant at the city of Mariupol, which has now been abandoned, and these people, both the civilians and the army and the 2,000 odd defenders at the steel plant, are being held as POWs or prisoners of war. So what I want to contend here is that there happens to be a lot of turbulence in the larger international system, which nearly brought the entire world to the precipice or to a kind of a cliffhanger of a war that the Ukraine and Russian conflict has largely become. This is one part of it. So where does China and India role play begin here? China is an ally of Russia, and China has already conveyed it to Washington and to Pentagon that the manner in which the NATO countries are interfering in Ukrainian self-defense by giving them medicines, food supplies, a mammoth quantum of armaments and other fighting material and aid. In the same manner, Taiwan can be a danger. So once again, the hegemonic, opportunistic, and the expansionist foreign policy of China or Beijing, it comes to the fore. What we can say is that China nearly involved itself in a kind of a, what do you call, a blackmail to the Americans and to the rest of the world and to India, that they will have a different military engagement with Taiwan if the NATO engagement does not continues and persists in Ukraine. And recently, if you look at the recent news events, what we are going to find is that J10, J11, J12, and J15 and the Sukhois of the PLAF, they were there and they crossed a line of demarcation. Not actually, they did not actually go into the Taiwanese airspace, but around a week back, they did their symbolic runs. They did their symbolic air runs near the airspace of Taiwan, and that really sent shivers of fear or concern down the entire Taiwanese territory. And if you look into Taiwan, then there is a clause in the TRA, that is the Taiwanese Relation Act, which has been also passed in the American Senate or the American Congress, that if a kind of a attack or a kind of an invasion of Taiwan occurs, then a legislation, which is the Article 5 of NATO, which says that an attack on a singular country would, who's a member of NATO, would invite countermeasures or counter defense, counter attack measures by other NATO members. Some such clause exists in a treaty, that is TRA, between United States of America and also and Taiwan. So China was quick to take upon the opportunity. Nobody takes North Korea and Kim Jong Un seriously, because he always brandishes missiles in the water space between North and South Korea, and sometimes throwing a nuke testing device in the waters near the international waters of Japan. But all these disparate incidents of Afghanistan, North Korea, nuclear skullduggery, and the Chinese threat of invading Taiwan, they are all interrelated. They are all interrelated in the sense that China in Cold War 2.0 is attempting to really extend its influence par pelf through both soft power and hard power. Now, if you look at the Sri Lankan crisis also, so I will not go deep into it. I'll just take another 5 minutes and then we can take questions. The Sri Lankan crisis might be the future that is holding forth for Pakistan. Pakistan might become part of the debt trap diplomacy that China has done to Pakistan. And Sri Lanka also seems to be in a debt somewhere between $8 billion vis-a-vis China. Where is the money going to come from? Are the IMF and the World Bank going to bail out Sri Lanka when they find themselves in such a situation, such a precarious economic situation? Protests, instability, and economic ruin and economic profligacy happens to be staring right in the face of the Rajpakasas in Sri Lanka. Ranil Wickremesinghe has come as the Prime Minister, but will he be able to take ameliorative members? But the root cause of all these problems lies in Beijing. Beijing has a super cop like behavior. It arm twists smaller countries in South China Seas, like over the issues of Senkaku and Daewoo in South China Sea, the issue of building coral military establishments near the border, near the confines of Indonesia and Philippines. They lead to a lot of ruffling of feathers in Southeast Asia and in the South China Sea area. India is not weak, but India too has to take up the military preparedness very seriously. Honorable and late General Bipin Rawat went on to contend that India has to be prepared for a two and a half front war. One front with Pakistan, one front with the People's Republic of China, and half a front because of the internal security threats posed by forces of Maoism, Naxalism, and cross-border terrorism. So China is a threat. Pakistan can be easily tackled, but if China also pounces upon us as a part of a larger military maneuver, then international community and United States of America must not show their real selfish face, as they have done in Ukraine and as they have done 6 months back in Afghanistan. But India too is not a walkover. India will not give a walkover. We have the great capacity to mobilize 28 divisions onto the Ladakh, the western and the central sector if China engages in a debilitating and invading military maneuver. We can do it within a few weeks. We can transport our 28 divisions. The China can do it in a better manner. It has been shown by a survey and it has been contended by one of our lieutenant generals who is in charge of Ladakh just a couple of days back, that if India can leverage 28 divisions on the China border in a jiffy, the Chinese can leverage 35 divisions in a jiffy because of their better infrastructure on the Indo-China border and across places like Arunachal Pradesh, the Chumbi Valley, Doklam, which happened in 2017, Depsang, Sumdorong which happened in 2000 and Sumdorong which happened in 1988, and recently the incidents and the confrontations at Pangong So. So what we need to contend is that China, with a vendetta-oriented foreign policy, is definitely a threat, and the hegemonic stability theory does not posit for China, but it does work for America because if America dominates the world, number one, it's a liberal democracy. Number two, it has a it has a traditional tenet of constitutionalism and international norms in its general foreign policy practice, which China does not have. So, if America dominates, and in my conjecture, will keep on dominating the world polity, then hegemonic stability will persist as it has been persisting in the entire world. But with China becoming rampant through its value chains and through its military legerdemain and through its debt trap diplomacy, then China will not bring in hegemonic stability. China will bring in lot of turbulence, lot of instability, and we might be faced by a global Armageddon. Thanks for listening to me, and I would invite questions or whatever is the format of the Lantern people. I would be willing to do that, but I would request that please let me off within 5 to 10 minutes as I have another engagement today. And thanks a lot to the Red Lantern people, to the students and the real talented, bright minds of the country who gave me this opportunity. Thanks a lot, Siddharth and Abhishek. It's
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your detailed presentation over this subject, sir. And we were really honored to be in this session. This session is also being live streamed at YouTube platform, sir, apart from WebEx. And we are getting questions from our participants. And the first question being that where do you see the South Asian region going in next 5 years, since we see that all of India's neighbors are tightly gripped in the Chinese debt trap and are facing political turmoil, military turmoil, like we see in Sri Lanka. Some sort of this is also observed in Pakistan. Myanmar is an example. So, where do you see the region going in next 5 years, sir?
It's a good question. I would just contend that India hopes against hope. New Delhi, Prime Minister Modi, Jovel sir, and the rest of them, they hope that Pakistan does not disintegrate. The kind of Chinese Chinese intent has been reflected through the Sri Lankan economic crisis. And I personally feel that South Asia is in for a very unstable and a vitriolic existence in the coming years because the CPEC is an experiment for serving Chinese interests and not Pakistani interests, though it might seem so overtly. But because of the working on of the debt trap diplomacy of China, Pakistan might really face a tough time both militarily and economically, and with their overzealous intent to involve everywhere involve India in the troubles and the challenges being faced by Pakistan. I think it will be a tough ride for countries like Pakistan. Bhutan has a tough choice because Bhutan has improved relations with China. It has no other option. It is a concern for India that Nepal and Bhutan are gradually moving towards a kind of an influence of China, which India will definitively will be able to avoid and lessen due to its diplomatic praxis. Bangladesh is very much good for India, but the kind of Chinese incursions and the Islamic fundamentalist incursions that have been going on in the Rohingyas and the Myanmar area, that is a cause of concern for India. Afghanistan will remain to be in the throes of humanitarian crisis unless and until somebody makes a comeback or unless and until Taliban reforms itself, which is itself a very tough ask. So I personally feel that China will continue its enticing policy towards South Asia, and India has to be strengthening its internal economic and military visceral visceral norm de plume so that we are able to confront any military or diplomatic challenge or the gauntlet if it is ever thrown by the Chinese to the Indians. That would be my brief response, Siddharth.
Thank you, sir, for answering this question. We have another question, sir, and it goes like when we talk about the global world order, we hope that USA is the fulcrum of that global world order. But we also see that USA has some intent issues, like they abandoned Afghanistan, and something of the similar sort we have also observed in Iraq when they had a partial withdrawal from Iraq, and the ISIS took over vast regions of the country. So, is USA even willing to counter China at a military level?
I think it's a very pertinent and very contemporary question with a great deal of contemporary significance. I personally feel that America has left the rostrum. America has left the mantle of its superpower seat. Though it will, practically speaking, it will remain to be it will continue to be the most powerful nation state on the face of the entire earth. That is a thing which is beyond question. But American, the utility of America, the utilitarian nature of American strength, military strength, and its soft power projection that has been questioned repeatedly now, as you rightly said, and I also mentioned in my narrative. Afghanistan has been very selfishly abandoned by United States of America, and they have not provided the kind of gumption or the kind of backup support which they were supposed to do to Zelensky and gang in the ongoing fracas in Ukraine. So I personally feel that United States of America is to be blamed to a great extent. And can you repeat the last part of your question, Siddharth?
The question goes on like USA has some intent issues. So, if USA at current times even willing to take on China at a militaristic level?
Very true. I personally feel that the trade war will continue on the geo-economic lines, and maybe till President Donald Trump was at the seat of power in the White House, he could have taken on militarily China. He could have militarily taken on China, and along with continuing his sanctions regime against China as part of the battle to become the largest and the most powerful economy of the world. But the backbone which the Republican governments had till President Donald Trump is very much absent, is very much conspicuous by its absence as far as President Joe Biden's foreign policy vis-a-vis China is concerned. The cyber diplomacy, the cyber cat and mouse ministrations are going to continue from the American fence. But when it comes to really countering the rogue nation state actors and also the rogue non-state actors like Taliban and the upstarts like China, I think America will think twice, and America will never directly involve itself in a military maneuver against China. And we are not, if we expect United States of America to intervene militarily in Ukraine or In the case of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, if we expect America to intervene in the Taiwanese conundrum, then we should not be construed as attempting to creating a war, or as attempting to create a war mongering platform or a war mongering international ecosystem, because when China does not hesitate to maim and re-educate its own Uyghur Turk population in Xinjiang when they attacked us in 62, and a consistent battle of nerves which is unobserved by us and unobserved and unreported by media goes on at the India China border, when they are not hesitating, as Narendra Modi has said, there should be an unhesitating, the word is non hesitating, of adhering to an aggressive foreign policy or a muscular foreign policy. So, when they are not hesitating in troubling India or in cocking a snook at America, why should we be left behind? But nobody wants a war. But preparedness is essential. And to put a stop on what I want to contend, under Joe Biden, there will be no military maneuver, especially against China, which is not good news for the Quad group of countries and especially for India. That's how I would put it, Siddharth.
Thank you, sir. And there is one last question, sir, before we wind up this session. And it asks that China uses its influence in global organizations to counter democratic countries. We have seen a similar trend where China stopped any developments in probing of the origin of the corona crisis. And where do you see this trend going in the next near future? Since China has its hold many various organizations of repute under its control, be it the United Nations, be it the WHO, or such organizations.
I personally feel that WHO, we talked about the Tedros fallacy, wherein Tedros openly went on to contend and defend China, and finally, the entire world, including India and the Western world, they had to come together and they had to really coin it in words. They had to they had to string their foreign policy sentiments and ideological sentiments. They have to string them into words and statements that China dominates certain sections of United Nations. China dominates the WHO, and Tedros was targeted very rightly so. You know, when we talk about the pandemic, the bad pandemic, as I personally called it, and I plagiarized it from the iconic personage of President Donald Trump during 17, 18, and 19. So, you know what we are going to contend is that China had this Wuhan facility going, which was running in cahoots with the Chinese origin scientists in Canada. So it is not a conspiracy theory as I feel it, but there definitely happens to be a malified intent, which is not a conspiracy theory, but it has been really traced down to Chinese ascendance and the Chinese peaceful rise, that they really utilized the pandemic as a biochemical weapon against countries like India and their European trade competitors in order to destabilize the entire international system and the committee of countries. This is my personal view, wherein I would go on to contend. And UN, if you look into UN, then recently Blanchett ma'am is visiting Xinjiang. But before visiting Xinjiang, in the capacity of the Human Rights Council's head at UN, people have gone on to contend. Americans have objected, and the European countries have objected that the United Nations human rights body should not completely trust the good offices and the facilitation which is being doled out by the Chinese to Blanchett ma'am. She goes there, but she herself has gone on to contend. And America has also reiterated that because the conditions are manufactured, there happens to be a manufactured consent as far as as far as the political and dissenting conditions in Xinjiang and Urukmi are concerned, because of which, in a controlled environment, the UN agency and the lady will never get to do unaccompanied and they will never be able to undertake unsupervised interviews, and no actual honest and unbiased monitoring can take place. This might be a pessimist voice, pessimist way of looking at the UN intrusion, but I personally feel that UN was very cleverly and cannily infiltrated by the Chinese. And who else but Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in 1948-49 made the Chinese a member of the United Nations Security Council without paying much heed to the Indian candidature as well, for which we are still afloat now. So I personally feel I would like to round it off and bind it up by contending that UN remains a kind of a symbolic, what do you call, entity. But still, when it comes to humanitarian disasters, which are also created by armed conflict the world over, UN definitely has played a credible role, has played a very good role, a very effective role as far as talking about health education, as far as influencing the indicators like health, education, innovation, and terrorism are concerned. But when it comes to real hard pitched decision, then countries like United States, which call themselves to be the Mount Sinai of the entire world system, they need to be more proactive. They need to be more intrusive as far as the concern of doing justice to their regulator status is concerned. That would be my brief response, Siddharth. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering our questions and presenting this topic in detail. I'll take this opportunity to thank you, sir, for your presentation. And certainly, Chinese threat is something which all the countries and their foreign policy making bodies must understand about. And I sincerely hope that all the participants attending our session who have joined us through WebEx and YouTube Live must have learned immensely from your detailed presentation of over this subject, sir. I'll also like to thank our founder, Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, who not only established Red Lantern Analytica as a think tank, but also guides us every time during such organization of events. With these words, on behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I'll also like to express our sincere thanks to all the academicians, research scholars, and students who have joined us today, and we express our heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, once again for taking out time from your busy schedule. And as you have said, you have another engagement also. So, with your due permission now, sir, we can bring this session to a close.
All right. I have a request, Siddharth.
Yes, sir.
Let me the pics of the screen.
Certainly, sir. Certainly, sir. I'll be sharing the screenshots of this session with you, sir.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Red
Thank you,
Lantern.
sir. Thank you, sir. We look forward to your engagement, sir, in our future events also, sir.
Oh,
Thank you,
I would
sir.
be more than happy to assist you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.